Today we're talking about exposure and how it changes.
Start over. So you start over.
Yeah.
Thinking about Cypress Hill, what does that mean?
Well, you go ahead and think about what you need to think about to remember your example that you came up with yesterday.
Exposure is, NFL year, going over the journey. And, Barbara and I were speaking, and a statement I made was, I bet half of the, sports, athletes who play sports that went professional would limit their years that they played, or even not even played at all. And
Ready? You're gonna welcome, or I'm welcome?
All right, you already said you were.
Okay. Welcome to the next episode of The Whitakers. I'm Barbara Whitaker.
You were.
You're supposed to go.
I thought you were gonna say what we're talking about.
You right there with me.
Like that.
You got you. Put your daddy shorts on. Okay. Welcome to the next episode of The Whitakers. I'm Barbara Whitaker.
Huey Whitaker.
Today we're going to be talking about exposure and the importance of exposure in your financial literacy journey, in your wealth building journey, and how it changes where you can grow to and go to.
The key takeaway would be to take a sacrifice with being uncomfortable. It's going to be key for you to expose yourself to new ideas, new thoughts, new places, new people even. I probably need to take some of my own advice. And by the way, this is an uncomfortable situation for me currently.
Why is that?
Doing these.
Okay.
So I'm doing that and taking that kind of leap of faith and really just getting uncomfortable a little bit, but knowing that it's there's a good cause behind it, and hopefully there's good cases that follow. Barbara and I were talking the other day. I didn't reach out to her this time, but we were just talking, and I guess, my example anyways, which is, near and dear to my heart, which is football, and the other one, which is finances and really just the stock market and investing. I kind of looked at the parallels between both, and I looked at the exposure, and Barbara and I were speaking about it. And football players, especially, kids that are, black and brown and kids in maybe tougher environments growing up, inner city or whatever, and people maybe that are, maybe single parent households, inner city, their exposure and their ultimate goals are surrounded around sports or music. And it's because those are who they see on the television and who look like them.
They're exposed to.
Well, yeah, of course. And that limits their belief to what they can achieve to that. And, a lot of the NFL players, again, I'm talking about football, we idolized the game and the players that we saw growing up. And so that's what we wanted to be. That was the ultimate of what we would have wanted to grow into if we could pick anything. And I told Barbara, Warren Buffett, I didn't hear about or know who Warren Buffett was or any famous investor or any stock market personality I made was. I bet half of the, sports athletes, people that play sports, that went professional would limit their years that they played, or even not even played at all. And, it's so much put on our bodies, put on the athletes mentally, the things that they had to go through just to get to where they are. There's a lot behind the scenes that people would have no idea that they went through, and the transition out is difficult as well. And so like I said, I'm one of them, right? Like if I could have a different route, or if I felt like I had options, which there was no other option. It's just I played, and it was a progression. And again, I think that's the case with a lot of athletes. It's just a progression. And once it becomes like, oh, that's a real possibility, there's no stopping now. I need to do that. And again, that's what I wanted to do as a kid anyways. But that was my option. And I would, argue that the opposite is true, right? Somebody that maybe their parents were, financially stable, and they had, maybe a different upbringing than other people. They were exposed to some of those things sooner.
I'm just going to keep going with your example because I just thought about it while you were talking. And Huey kind of mentioned, how athletes struggled getting out of football. For him in particular, I remember when he was like, getting the inclination that he needed to do something different. He had been in the league, in different leagues, in maybe like 10 years total or something like that. I don't know. But when you were ready to get out, you were like, I need to pray about this. I need to pray about where God can put me, because you really couldn't see yourself like doing anything else.
Just
You've been
2 years.
playing football
I
for
prayed
so
for it was
long.
2 years.
Yeah, and then you were presented with the opportunity to kind of go into the financial industry, and that was uncomfortable for you. You had done what, like selling water and like knocking on doors.
Selling water. We probably should clarify. They were water conditioning systems, so like water softeners. It wasn't selling water like on the street, water bottles. I would have though, and I've done equivalent measures.
And the mortgage, but he was doing everything. But he was exposing himself to a lot of different things, very uncomfortably. So he could sell anything, but he was doing that, and so I just thought about that. But to go along with the point of, you made that uncomfortable decision to get out of something that he didn't have to leave at the time that he left. He was still very healthy, and could have continued to play at a very high level. But he was like, while I still have my body intact, I'm gonna need to make this move. And so that is something that changed our path, because he wasn't stuck there. He had to find something that he saw himself doing outside of football, which was a tough situation. So,
yeah, and by the way, like, this is a sacrifice. Doing this is uncomfortable for me. Yeah. Doing this, a lot of people know me really well. This is not necessarily my idea, but in support of my wife and the mission of making sure that information is conveyed to as many people as possible. We also are taking I'm not just me personally, but we also are taking and making a sacrifice in doing this.
Yeah, absolutely.
Again, not that this is not a boo-hoo story or a sob story to people that have achieved professional sports or did well in music. Just to say though that a lot of us have not heard of like Warren Buffett until like adulthood, or been exposed to games that encourage business transactions like golf. There's just a lot of differences, and so if you look at the antithesis, that would be an individual that may have parents that have done well, successful financial endeavors, businesses have done well for themselves and their families, and their exposure maybe was very early to some of the investment options and details and specifics that they can do and take advantage of even as a kid.
How business works or how investing works, and it's kind of like we do with our kids.
Absolutely. So, and that exposure now brings about a different level of limitation. Their limitation is much different. So some of those kids even play sports, but they have a thought that, I don't really see myself playing professional sports because I really would rather do, open up a business or go into my family business or start this business. And again, it's, that is the argument. That was a conversation Barbara, and not an argument, it's a conversation Barbara and I had. And we think it's relevant to the exposure that those two groups were basically, brought up in. And so Barbara, I don't know, that's the story. Did you want to talk about GFS?
I mean, I'll talk about GFS. One of my initial example I was going to give on my exposure is I initially started out in a public school. And then in fourth grade, fifth grade, I went to a private school. I was there for several years into my first high school until ninth grade. And then when my family moved to Florida, I went back to public school. And I had the ability to really see the juxtaposition between going to a really high level private school and regular public school. Right. And the way teaching and learning happens in those two different environments is vastly different. And I think the opportunity, the unintentional opportunity that I had to attend a private school really helped expose me to things that I would not have seen if I stayed in public school my entire education, during the lower level years. I got to see wealthy parents, and they weren't flashy or anything like that, but they had really nice houses. They had, boats and, camping, you did overseas trips. And I mean, those are things that in my normal setting and environment, I would have never have seen. And it allowed me to see another way of life that people had. And it's like, oh, that's kind of nice. Like, I wouldn't mind, not struggling. And so those are the things that I was able to be exposed to in my public school years, and education as well, just understanding the, how to learn differently, how to look at things differently. Those were all very important things that I learned going to private school.
So the first step of what this was supposed to be, the key takeaway, was to expose yourself and sacrifice something in that exposure, get uncomfortable in a situation, select something that is going to make you uncomfortable, but expose you to something bigger or different than you're used to in order to grow.
So there's two different types of exposure. You can have that unintentional exposure, or you can have intentional exposure. And obviously, that unintentional exposure could be, your aunt or uncle taking you on a vacation in another country that you've never been to. You don't travel much, and you get to see another place that you've never seen before, and it's kind of like, wow, these places really exist. That's the unintentional bucket that you don't really have much control over. It just kind of it happens, you fall into it, or whatever the case may be. What we're talking about is intentional exposure, and that intentional exposure is, you're intentionally putting yourself. You said make a sacrifice, but you're intentionally forcing yourself to do something outside of your boundaries, your normal boundaries, that you would than what you would typically do. For us, when we were like, we part of our story is we made a decision, like we would never be broke again. Like we were done. We were sick and tired of being sick and tired, and we were like, okay, this is not the life that we kind of envisioned for ourselves. We are never going to be broke again. We intentionally made the decision to start educating ourselves. And that's kind of, we'll get to the point where we're talking about our 7 pillars that like we've coined from our foundation on the 7 pillars to building wealth. But education is at the crux of everything, the foundation of everything. We would read every book about building wealth and businesses and mindsets, because that's really important. Just having the right thinking, changing you're thinking about certain things, and so that is what we intentionally did to kind of change our path. We've probably read or listened to, because we do a lot of audible books because we're coming and going a lot. I mean, I don't know, hundreds of books at this point, just going back and forth, reading stuff here and there. He reads something, he gives it to me, I read something, like, this is a good one. And we were intentionally making that effort.
Yeah, and my exposure just came mainly through football. I didn't have that. I didn't go to private school. I actually a fan of public school. In some regard, I think there needs to be a little bit of a balance. But yeah, I mean, mine came through football, and it just exposed me to being in rooms, from people when I first, in college and getting recruited, and understanding what a 100,000 person crowd looks like. Going up to UF every weekend and getting free tickets because they were recruiting me, to getting in and getting opportunities to play in NFL, AFL, and UFL. And being in an office environment, not football environment, but through football, with multiple billionaires, and just seeing how they talk and act and kind of compose themselves, it's just a lot different. They're not flashy. It's just like it's a totally different experience, and so that does shape you along the way. And what I would say is, lastly, is, and I don't know if this is a term, but eaglets. When eagles have their nest, and once the eaglets are ready to fly. Or I shouldn't say when they're ready to fly, but when the parent is ready to teach the eaglet to fly, it is a preparation, it's a process. So first they start to prepare the nest, and they make it uncomfortable. So the nest, instead of like having, some of the comfortable pieces that they can get out in nature, they start throwing like sticks and things, and it's uncomfortable. And so they make it uncomfortable and continue to pull it away from the softness, and essentially to get thrown off a cliff, really, at the end of the day, and they gotta learn how to fly. And that's, I think, the extreme side of things. But if that helps you, right, to say, man, if that's how eagles learn how to fly, I could at least, travel to a different country, because I never left the city or the state or US, if that's what that is. Then hopefully encourages you to take that next step. So,
so we're just encouraging you today to expose yourself. Exposure, creates a gateway to financial wisdom. What you see, you start to believe, and what you start to believe, you start to build. So we are encouraging you to expose yourself to a new book, to a new series online. I mean, we appreciate you watching our channel and getting this exposure, because we really truly believe that there is an opportunity to not stay stuck.
And that's all, folks.
Thanks everybody for joining. That's it for today, and we just hope that you continue subscribing, liking, sharing, commenting. We need you guys to comment, and we'll see you on the next one.
Have a good night. God bless.